I will be your moderator today. My name is Aron Kogelkoren with Rutgers. And today we'll be sharing the lessons and to present the findings from our research on scaling up sexuality education and the steps for CSOs and NGOs to take and to further up this process. Because we believe by embracing the right scaling strategies, the largest generation of youth is able to really develop themselves. I'd like to share the objective for this webinar today, as it's not only to share with you what we've come to learn through the researches and the lessons we have seen across the examples where scale-up of CSE did happen, but also to take the next step and not see this as the end of a research, but rather as the beginning of working on this together. So throughout the webinar, I would welcome you to now at the start, pick a piece of paper and a pen. And throughout the webinar, note down any ideas that you have for practically applying this. Ideas for working together in collaboration, or just advice for us how we can move this agenda further. Later on during the webinar, we will give space to share these with us. And these can be for anything from research to advocacy or technical assistance. It can be in any area of work. I have already throughout now used different terms such as probably CSE and sexuality education. In some contexts, it might be called life skills or HIV education. I do want to emphasize that we aim for sexuality education to be comprehensive and to build on the evidence. And therefore we build on the UNESCO international guidance and see how we can expand the programs that we know that work so that to reach as many youth as possible and make it available to everyone. So today's agenda will be packed and we will have exciting speakers. After me just now, our program director, Marieke Ridder, will share some welcoming notes and share with you why Rutgers is embracing a scaling approach to sexuality education. After that, we'll have a special guest, Larry Cooley, who leads a global community of practice on scaling up education health programs with over 1,000 active members. We'll have Audrey Katana sharing how she researched the case studies and how she merged that into an overarching framework with the lessons and steps that are common across the examples that we found. And then we'll have a number of Rutgers colleagues guiding you to the nitty-gritty of scaling up CSE and what types of activities are involved through the process. And all of this will be made tangible through interviewees and special guests from Ghana, Ismail Selassie from PPAG, we have Amala Rama from Rutgers Indonesia, Ismail, we have Ibrahim Musa, apologies, from Benin, and also Miranda from Rutgers. So with that, I would just like to start with the webinar, and I will give the word to Marieke Ridder, our program director.
Hello, welcome to this webinar on scaling up sexuality education. My name is Marieke Ridder, and I'm the Director International Programs at Rutgers in the Netherlands. And what I'll do is I'll try to set the stage about why is Rutgers organizing this webinar and is really embracing a scale-up approach for sexuality education. So Rutgers is the Netherlands Center on Sexuality, and we have been here for over 50 years. And we have really worked to improve the sexual and reproductive health and rights of young people. We don't do that alone, we do that in partnership, and partnership is vital. And together with partners in the Netherlands, but also in 30 other countries, or over 30 other countries in the world, we really work to improve these sexual rights, access to sexuality education and information, access to contraceptive methods or access to safe abortion, and really to prevent sexual and gender-based violence. So we have a long track record on working on CSE, and we believe that CSE should be there for all young people, and it covers, you know, the gender, the puberty, consent and sexual reproductive health, the pleasure part, everything included. We support a large number of expert organizations that deliver high quality education programs, or conduct advocacy for more progressive laws and policies, or we work on a positive social and gender norms, or carry out cutting edge research and develop state-of-the-art materials to support the implementation of CSE. So through the experiences in our international work, we have contributed to system exchange really beyond the program's duration. We did that in Pakistan through the GUZO program, and really to look at how we were able to institutionalize the life skills program in Punjab province together with the welfare department, or for example in Uganda through our program of Right Here Right Now and GUZO, and together with our partners we were able to launch a CSE framework by the government. So those are, when the program ends, it is still there. We really invest in comprehensive sexuality education because, look, the evidence is there. It is really, really clear. It shows that young people wait until a later age to have their first sexual experience, have lower teenage pregnancies and abortion rates, and have higher rates of contraceptive use. They also report less discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender differences. So building on our experiences, Rutgers provides trustworthy, up-to-date, accessible and supportive information on comprehensive sexuality education. And our aim is really to spread this expertise and knowledge to other stakeholders, to support them, to learn from other stakeholders and to implement quality CSE programs and address the challenges of large-scale implementation. So despite all the global work, because a lot is already done on CSE, there are also so many people that still don't have access, so many young people. And they lack their really access on comprehensive or curriculum-based sexuality education. And it's also shown in the last UNESCO Global Stage report. There is a significant gap that is still remaining. So the main challenge as we see it is to move from more short-term donor-funded projects and programs to sustainable delivery throughout the school system. And I think it's a common challenge for all of us working in this field and working with a lot of donor-funded programs. When the program ends, we have to really look at if the approach is not being sustained by the government, or if there is little focus on implementation or funders that maybe can hand it over to the government. So really focus more within the programmatic setting already at longer sustainability, so beyond the program, like we did, like I showed in the examples in Uganda and in Pakistan. Today, we will take next steps and embrace a systems approach to move from reaching thousands to actually reaching millions of young people with all the work that we do. We will share examples, and one of the examples is the work that is done in Indonesia in collaboration with UNFP and the Ministry of Education to really nationally scale up comprehensive sexuality education. Today we will together look at the learnings, and can we adapt it, and think about that as well. How can you adapt it to your own system? We really want to equip you with the right scaling strategies, and really focus that together we can try to get the largest generation of young people fully engaged, educated, healthy, and have them as productive adolescents on board. I want to wish you a great webinar with lots of learnings, and enjoy it.
Marika Ridder with her welcoming notes. Before going to our next speaker, Larry Cooley, I would just like to raise that we do have question and answer option available today. So if you go to the chats, you can click the Q&A person and send your messages there in English, French, or Spanish, and we'll try to answer as many as possible throughout the webinar today. In case we aren't able to respond today, we will make sure to follow up after the webinar by email. So with that, I would like to introduce Larry Cooley, a global scaling expert with a long track record of advising governments, international organizations on scaling and change management, and share with us the lessons that he's learned through that time. Larry, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me, and thank you also for the work that you all do. Arden has encouraged me to be candid with you, and that's exactly what I'm going to do. And I'm afraid that involves beginning with some challenging news. And that challenging news is that less than 5% of validated interventions ever go to scale. Think about that. That means that 19 out of 20 things that could really help people don't ever help the people that they should help in the numbers they should help them. Why is that? And why is it that we get stuck in this model of experimentation, innovation, delivery to small numbers, but don't make it to large? That's what I'd like to spend just a few minutes talking to you about. And I want to suggest to you that it's because we get trapped many times in a project mentality, in a philanthropy modality. What do I mean by that? Projects are things that are 1, 3, perhaps 5 years in length. If we're lucky, they get renewed. Sometimes they get expanded. They're funded often by philanthropists of one sort or another, good intentions, limited capabilities, and the ability to move that all the way through a system, not just to the size it needs to be, but to forever, not to 1, 3, or 5 years, is an inherent limitation in that project approach to things. I'll say this to you very bluntly. If government is not involved in a scaling strategy for a social service, that strategy will not be scaled. I'll say it again. If government is not involved in a direct way in the delivery and the funding of that strategy, it will not be scaled. So think about that. That means going from government permission to government ownership. Permission to ownership sounds like a small step. It's a huge step. It's a difference between allowing something and truly taking responsibility for it in the government. And if you think about it, think about the governments of your countries. That's a big step. It's a big commitment, and it's a big challenge. There are many things they're being asked to do. They're under pressure financially to do this, this, and this. And you're trying to get them to do yet one more thing. Usually that means getting yourself beyond the position of direct delivery and really beginning to work with them much more closely around advocacy, understanding, and integration into what they do. It means moving comprehensive sexuality education from being an intervention to being simply the new normal, the way schools operate, the way programs are delivered. It's no longer a program apart. It's now simply part of the new standard operation. So how does that happen? I suggest it probably, for most of you, means some change in the role you're currently performing. It means instead of being primarily direct delivery, you're trying to help the system absorb this change, and you're trying to help convince it to do so. How does that happen? Well, we now luckily have quite a lot of experience from other sectors and some from your own sector about how that happens. And I want to suggest to you at least 3 lessons. The first thing is that evidence matters, but evidence is not the main thing. The main thing is really trying to understand the priorities of the governments you're working with, the decision-making processes, who the trusted voices are, and how to begin to get them to understand the importance of what you're presenting for the problems and the needs and the communities they're trying to serve. That means using all the experience you have, using all the trust that you've engendered over time, but changing your role somewhat from helping them absorb and adopt new change to rather than trying to do it yourselves. The second thing is, if that's going to happen, it usually means not trying to bring some international message to the country, but trying to understand what it looks like from their point of view, trying to link to their priorities, trying to identify those elements of their agenda which you can help them further. And given what you're doing on comprehensive sexual education, that can be many things. In one case, it may be delaying child marriage or child sexual activity. In another case, it may be HIV reduction. In another case, it may be simply healthy living. But in each case, it's going to be important not that you preach to them, but that you really understand and try to get inside their reality and figure out what's needed. And finally, I'll end by saying that as a community, development professionals and people in the lines of work that you all and I'm in are usually quite good at innovation. And we're quite good at delivery, particularly when we have control of the resources and the inputs. But this is asking you to perform a different role. It's a role that among the scaling community, we call intermediation. It's a fancy word, but it simply means trying to do all the things necessary to take a good idea to scale and to encourage people to do that. That's a world of influence, not a world of control. It's a world where it's your job to try to figure out how that system works, how the budgeting system works, how the provision system works, and what it would take to introduce little by little, incrementally, responsibility and true ownership on the part of the government, whether it relates to funding, what we call funder at scale, or implementation, what we call doer at scale. These are easy to say and hard to do steps, and they sometimes require bringing into your own teams skills beyond the ones that you currently have, but it's noble work, it's important work, and I can promise you it's the way forward on scaling. I wish you great success in doing this and congratulate you again on the fine work that you're already doing. Back to you.
Thank you very much, Larry. That's exciting news for things that we can do, but also very challenging remarks about only little programs actually scaling. With that in mind, we're going off to our next guest, Audrey. Could you please take us through the process you've been through?
Good afternoon. Thanks so much. So as we've mentioned before, this webinar is actually about presenting the findings of a review and a report that was commissioned by Rutgers. And its main purpose is to encourage civil society organizations to actually contribute and support the scale up of sexuality education within education systems. So this is very specific to education system scale up. There were several reasons that have already been mentioned before as to why to move forward on this piece of work. As mentioned before, there are sustainability issues. But even beyond that, there's also the fact that there's low coverage of CSC in many countries. In some countries, there are many projects and programs, and many of these projects and programs are never taken to scales. And this is especially true for CSO-led programs that are often very successful, but in a small scale. They are rarely institutionalized and rarely sustainable because at some point in the future, donor funding always ends. So the specific objective of this piece of work was to identify and provide an overview of the key steps that would be required to scale up curricular CSC in schools, and especially to identify the issues for CSOs to consider in deciding if and how they can provide support. So we're really talking about CSC in school, in curricula, whether it's a standalone curricula or integrated into other curricula. Next slide, please. The piece of work was based on three main aspects. The first was it was a colleague and I didn't do this alone, conducted a number of interviews with key informants. And these informants were both at the global and national level. We interviewed young people, we interviewed government partners, we interviewed CSOs, NGOs, donors, UN agencies, to try and get an idea of what people were feeling and what has been successful and what has not been successful. The second aspect was a desk review. And here we did a desk review not only of the published literature, but also of grey literature. And we covered not only CSC literature, but also literature around scaling up and the findings of and lessons learned from scaling up health and other social programs in different countries. And then finally, we did 4 case studies on 4 countries. The countries were Benin, India, Indonesia, and Zambia. And the point of doing those case studies was really to sort of get into more detail as to what functioned and what didn't function, and what lessons we could learn from those 4 experiences. Next slide, please. So this framework was based out of these 3 different, out of the whole kind of review process. And what we decided to do was to create a framework which would provide an overview of the components of a scale-up process. So as a result, this list is not complete, and each of the aspects that you see on your screen right now need to be further broken down. In addition, not all of these aspects are equal. Some will be a continuous piece of work that you start from the beginning of a process and continue right through forever, and others will be time-bound activities that will be done and finalized and moved on from. There's a few things to take into consideration. First of all, while this is presented as in a linear fashion for ease of understanding, in reality, this is not the case. This is not a linear process. In addition, all countries are at different stages. None is starting from scratch. Everybody's got some curriculum content that covers different aspects, whether it be HIV, whether it be pregnancy, whatever the case may be in your particular country. So what's really important is establishing what has already been done and what remains to be done. The way we went about this is that we decided to divide up the components into 4 main areas with 2 cross-cutting areas. So the 2 cross-cutting areas are advocacy and sensitization, and social and behavior change communication. And you can see that those 2 cross-cutting areas, they need to happen from the beginning and be continuous for forever. Even once scale-up has been achieved, advocacy needs to continue, sensitization needs to continue, and there will always be need for social and behavior change communication. Now, if we look at the 4 main areas of this framework, and subsequent presenters will go into a lot more detail about these different areas of work. As Larry mentioned, understanding the context is really important. So that involves, knowing who the key partners are, who the opposition is, but also sort of understanding the policy, the legal, the sociocultural context, understanding what is already being done, what is not being done, assessing the systems and their capacity, but also, and essentially, it's actually about understanding yourself and an organization and what you can and can't do. The second main area of work is also about making the case and engaging in dialogue. So how is it that you're going to persuade, be it parents, religious leaders, politicians, the media, that CSC is essential and has to be provided in schools? You can use different ways of doing this. As mentioned earlier, you could use the entry point of early and unintended pregnancy. You could use child marriage. You can use different ways of bringing up and making the case for providing CSC in schools. But this whole aspect is essential not only to make it acceptable, but also to make sure that when opposition comes along, if it comes along in the future, then you have a good base to work from. The third main area is actually establishing the building blocks. So that's everything from who's going to do what, how's it going to get paid for, how you're going to coordinate things. It's actually working out whether you will provide CSC as a standalone subject or whether you will integrate it into other subjects. It's about making sure that you develop a good curriculum, good materials, you pilot those materials, and obviously, evaluation and measurement of of the program itself and how it's functioning, including. In this aspect, there is a whole aspect around how would you actually link CSC to out-of-school CSC, but also to services, because we know that that linkages to SRH services is really important if we want behaviors to change in the future. And then the fourth main area is about the actual sort of scaling up. So it's really about, how do you secure local support and permission to actually kind of make sure that it's actually people buy into this and will actually allow this to take place in their schools, and that the time will be allocated in the curriculum. It's also about working out how you're actually, actually scaling up the teacher training in service and pre-service, but also how and ensuring that the institutionalization of all of the different aspects within government systems. So making sure that CSE is integrated into education management information systems, making sure that the education inspectors are on board, and all kinds of other issues. And then it's about making sure that you sustain support and address the opposition. This is something that is growing in a number of regions of the world and in some countries. And we really need to be thinking about this from the very beginning so that we address this from that point. So it should be noted that no one organization can take on all of these components of a scale up. So the first step is really understanding what your organization can and can't do, and thus if and how it should contribute. So if the aim of the organization is one to be a strong advocate, a kind of stick that's kind of screaming about SRH rights on the barricades and wanting to make a big fuss out of it, you can't play the same role as an NGO that is behind the scenes and providing support to government. So it's very important to identify what one's strengths are, but also what one's weaknesses are and what the reputation of the organization is within a country. And then you need to decide which role it is that you actually want to play and you can play, taking into consideration everything from your funding cycles and your HR resources. So the following presenters will go into more detail about each of these different areas, but I also wanted to highlight a few key lessons learned that are present in the report if and when you decide to read it, but that are really, really important when we're thinking about sort of whether to participate and support the scale up of CSE in a country. And one of the clearest lessons that came out of all the literature as well as the case studies is governments must be, and they must be seen to be, in the driving seat. So any organization, any donor supporting them has to be out of the limelight. This is especially important if there is opposition to CSE in the country. And it's also especially important for government to feel that that this is their project, they're taking this on, and they will be putting the resources, both human and financial, into this. It also needs to go beyond just the ministry feeling that, but it has to be the whole sort of political environment feeling that CSE is part of their job. The other really important key lesson learned was around the importance of understanding the context. So here we're talking not only the social, political, and legal aspect, but also understanding the education sector itself, how it works, its capacity, what it can and can't do, and what it can and can't accept. And as a result of this, there is a need to adapt CSE to a country's context. In many countries, curricular CSE will not contain all the aspects we would like to see included, and/or the education sector may not have the capacity to implement a perfect CSE curriculum. So it's really about understanding what you can and can't achieve within a country and moving forward in that way. This is also important when you're looking at securing the buy-in at subnational level and also teacher support, because if teachers don't support this process, then they will either not teach the content or they will teach it badly, which means you will not end up with a quality CSE in schools. Yet again, as mentioned earlier, key lesson learned, the importance of building the case for CSE and building the political and public commitment. And then finally, the fact that you really need to support CSE and prepare for and address opposition from the very beginning and on a continuous basis. These were very rapid lessons learned. I'm going to pass on to my colleagues to go through each of the different areas of the framework. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Audrey, for sharing the framework with us and taking us through how to interpret the larger framework. The next phase of this webinar, Rutgers colleagues will take us through each of the phases and take you through a bit the nitty-gritty of the steps that are involved. And that will be made more tangible by different interviewees that have gone before us. So with that, I'm going to give the word to my colleague Heidi.
Thank you, Arden. And it's so great to see colleagues from different organizations with us today. Thanks all for joining us. I will take you through stage 1 of the scaling process, which is focused on understanding the context and your role within it. From our research, we have concluded the overall outcome of this stage is scaling, and in the scaling process is that your organization has determined its role on scaling efforts within an updated understanding of the gaps in CSE delivery at systems level. Before we delve further into how to get to that point, we have a poll for you. We are still learning how to make polls in multiple languages. So today we are trialing a new method. On the slide in front of you, you can see the poll in several languages which are color-coded. So identify your language now and look for a similar color in the next few polls. Now think about your preferred answer to this question. Shortly, you will see a pop-up window with this poll. This will only be in English. So pay attention to the number for your chosen answer now. If you're ready, Ian, please launch this poll and vote now for your preferred choice. That's come up now nicely, thank you. Now, we see some answers coming in. Thank you so much for that. That's great to see what you think about this. And we ask you, how well do you know the individuals that make and influence educational policy decisions in your district? And we gave you 4 options of how well you know those people. I think we've closed the poll now, and I'm gonna let you see the results on screen. Not many of you know them so well to have lunch with them, but most of you see them on the media, and quite a few of you, more than 30%, have spoken to them at events. So we have a mixed group. Thank you so much for participating in that. Now, you know how this poll will work in the future. And I think we can move on to the next slide, where I can introduce the 5 concrete steps that we have identified in this stage. The first one is to conduct your self-assessment. So if you're interested in doing that, you will find it really helpful to go to the report that we are launching today, and we will share a link for this at the end of the session. And if you go to page 10, you will find a list of key questions that you can discuss with your team that will help you look at the mandate that your organization has, what your reputation is in your context, what is your capacity, and also what systems you have in place to help with pushing forward the scaling process. Rutgers also has experience in facilitating multi-organizational assessments of this kind from our processes supporting national SRHR alliances in recent years. So if that's something you wanted to do, please get in touch with us if you would like some support. The second step in this stage is to identify the key partners, the champions, and the opposition. When you review the context, it's helpful to look at a number of things. Educational authorities, also at subnational level, the school management, the teachers, training institutions, and teacher unions, and association, universities, community and religious leaders, parents, CSOs, and the media. For each stakeholder, it's important to understand their strengths, their weaknesses, what's their possible obstacles and levers, how they work internally and how they work with others, their existing projects and materials, their future plans, and what funding they have or can access. The third step in this first stage is assessing the policy, legal, and sociocultural context. And when you are looking at the policy assessment, you should include a review of laws or documents that may represent barriers to sexuality education implementation and scale up too. Don't forget that. The fourth step is understanding the current status of sexuality education in your context. This entails analyzing data on young people's SRHR, their behaviors, their access to services, the coverage that sexuality education currently has, as well as the cultural and religious context. This understanding is essential to make the case for sexuality education and strategies to build support and engage communities. And then the fifth step, which is the final we wanted to share with you, is to assess the systems and capacity. So we hope that this gives you a concrete list of areas to work on if you are trying to build a strong foundation for your scale-up efforts. I also want to highlight some key lessons that might be helpful too. So let's move to the next slide, please. As already said, plan for sustainability from the start. Your organizational reputation and the trusted relationships that you have are in the lead. Know the champions within the decision-making institutions. This is why we asked that question in our poll. Have a good understanding of education system and a track record within it. So even if you have to do that through allies, if this is not the forte for your organization. And scaling up must be planned for within the education system constraints. That's very important so that you can actually scale up. So those are the key lessons I wanted to highlight for this stage. I'm going to stop now and introduce our colleague Ishmael Salesi, who works for PPAG in Ghana. Their organization has been studying their context through a stakeholder analysis in recent months. Ishmael, are you with us?
Yes, I am here.
Fantastic. Welcome, Ishmael. Thanks for joining us. I have a key question for you. I'm hoping you can share with our audience. What are your key recommendations and learning for others embarking on stakeholder analysis processes?
Thank you very much, Heidi. And it's a pleasure to interact with everyone. Good morning, good afternoon. And so Heidi's question, thank you so much for that question. And I start by saying that it's really important that you have a clear understanding of your program and you are able to ensure a successful interaction of your program with what I call the 3 Ps and a B. So the 3 Ps are policy, program, partners, and beneficiaries. The policy, the program, partners, and beneficiaries. You need to be able to ensure that your program, your CSE program, is able to effectively interact with all these 4 different elements because they all have an interest and a stake in ensuring the success of your CSE program. Now, to be able to do this, from our experience, what we tried to do was to first of all try to understand the context. What is the environment, the country context within which we wanted to deliver our CSE or we needed to continue delivering our CSE. And that helped us to know what the feelings of every sector of the society was and how we were going to then approach all the different interest groups. The second thing that is really important was to identify which specific government policy provides for or has a relationship with the CSE that we needed to deliver for in school and for out of school, because this is where it mattered most. And I heard Larry mention that we cannot do anything without the government. And for us, the government then was a reflection of the policies that existed in the country for CSE at the country level. Then the next thing we tried to do based on our understanding of the policy was also to see what is the definition of the key actors as far as the policy is concerned? Which state or public agencies had the mandate, the legal mandate, to ensure delivery of CSC? Because these were the people or institutions whose word mattered most. And once we got these people from the policy point of view, we were ready to go. But we needed to get back also into the community, because besides political institutions that provided the platform and opportunity for CSC delivery, the community was also the other side. The community and the school spaces were the recipients, and they are gatekeepers in those places that we needed to actively engage and bring on board to be able to understand that. So we had to conduct the community and scan to identify the key stakeholders who needed to be part of the process and to understand what we wanted to do and to have their buy-in to support the program. And then the other thing that for me is one of the most crucial lessons that we learned in this process was the fact that we learned to be humble. We learned to be humble, to be able to work from behind. We don't always have to be in front, because the understanding the context and the environment helped us to know that we are not always the best and the perfect and the people that the community want to hear from. There are others who have the credibility, not that we don't have credibility, but their voices are better listened to, and their appearance and their posturing is more acceptable to the communities. And if we could go behind these people and push them to do what needed to be done to ensure that young people had access to CSC, then that is what we did. And the point is that what we needed was to get assistance, buy-in, and community support for CSC to flourish. And if we had to work from behind others in order to achieve that, then that's what we were happy to do. What we're interested in was to get a buy-in and to win for CSC for young people. So these are critical elements of our lessons that we want to share with you, and we are happy to engage with you going forward to share more with you. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Ishmael, for sharing your experience and your learning with us. As usual, super helpful to hear from actual experience of doing interesting work. I am now going to hand the floor over to my colleague Jackie, who will take us through the next stage.
Thank you, Heidi. So I will walk you through the second phase, which is about making the case and engaging in dialogue. The desired outcome here is that key stakeholders have a common understanding of the need for sexuality education scale-up and are willing to collaborate to achieve sustainable delivery at scale. Next slide, please. But before we delve into the topic, I would like to know more about you through a second poll. Ian, can you please launch the poll? Let's see. What could be the strongest reason for scaling CSC in your country? Interesting. Let's wait a bit more. Okay, we can see the results now. Ian, can you please close the poll? Thank you. As expected, answers here differ because, of course, they depend on each context. We can see preventing teenage pregnancies 45%, preventing sexual abuse 22%. Oh, disappeared. What we aim to highlight here is that linking CSC to an issue of national or local concern can help obtain buy-in from politicians or other stakeholders. And of course, this will depend on each context and each culture. Next slide. Oh, thank you. So I will walk you through the second phase. And this phase emphasizes the relevance of integrating a CSC program within the government systems. This means engaging government stakeholders as active collaborators and implementers. In Zambia, for example, parliamentarians received CSC training. When resistance to CSC started in the country, they were able to push back as they understood what CSE is and what it covers. Likewise, this phase stresses the importance of forming coalitions with different stakeholders to be more effective. And here, it is essential to note that we commonly tend to partner with like-minded organizations, which is good. However, what the evidence shows is that it is effective to partner with less usual actors, such as universities and research. Actors can often provide evidence, resources, and legitimacy to support the rationale for CSE. Something to be mindful about in this stage is the framing or the different rationales for CSE. We want to ensure that content is responsive to country needs, the socio-cultural context, and potential sensitivities. The international human rights approach, for example, can resonate very well internationally, but does not always have the same level of reception locally. Experience shows that to facilitate dialogue, it is critical to link sexuality education to an existing local issue of concern to decision makers, such as bullying prevention, HIV prevention, and teenage pregnancy prevention. Additionally, it is crucial to secure the support of other stakeholders who can influence success. Country experience highlights the importance of sensitizing parents, teacher unions, community and religious leaders, and let's don't forget the media. This is a crucial step for building support and addressing CSE resistance if and when it arises. And finally, this stage highlights the importance of acknowledging that young people are knowledgeable and should be meaningfully engaged in this process. What we have learned from Indonesia is that organizations' board members can open doors to key decision makers, but young people are best placed to express their needs and engage in dialogue once these doors are open. Next slide, please. Before our Q&A, I would like to briefly highlight 4 lessons learned in this phase. First one, key lesson from all successful examples, as Larry explained at the beginning of this webinar, is to engage government stakeholders as active collaborators and implementers. Second, CSO should be prepared to work behind the scenes, as Ismael mentioned, and take the facilitative role while the government is on the lead. Third, link sexuality education to an existing local issue of concern. And fourth, work in coalitions with less usual actors. Now, I'm sharing this segment of this webinar with Amala Rama. I can see Amala's spotlight. There you are, Amala. Amala is the Rutgers Indonesia country representative. She will be speaking about the Indonesian case, also documented in the report, and considered as a successful example of CSE scale-up. Welcome, Amala. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Yeah, thank you, Jacqueline. So,
sorry, I have 2 questions for you.
Yeah.
The first one is, how did you become a trusted government partner, and how did this help to scale up?
Okay, thank you for inviting me. So I will answer your question based on my experience working in Rutgers Indonesia for almost 5 years. In general, I will say the Indonesian government is quite open to the needs of youth and the issue we are promoting, as long as we approach them in the right way. So humbly speaking, I will say 10 years ago, NGOs in Indonesia were still positioning the government as stakeholder outside of the program. Schools and local government were treated as a recipients. So this is not sustainable because when the program ends, the government will not sustain it. So acting as friends or party who will help them achieve their performance is how we have been doing so far. We studied various government missions at national and local level. We have 5 years planning and performance evaluation every year. I think it's similar with the Netherlands government. What Rutgers Indonesia does is contextualize our activities and program targets with these performance indicators. So for example, in almost all regions or cities, a mayor has a target to make his city child-friendly. So that is very important for their political career. we convinced them that the mayor could achieve the target if the children in the city are free from sexual violence or bullying, is reduced by providing reproductive health education in school and communities. This diplomacy made them feel that Rutgers wasn't there to bring a new burden, but helped them to achieve a common goal. And in the other hand, we think that NGO need to increase their skills and capacity to play the roles of consultant for the government based on their practical experience and lesson learned. So NGO roles is to convince the government and start implementing together. Doing program planning, we do co-implementing, co-monitoring, and co-evaluation is essential to build ownership since the beginning and create responsibility by the government. I think we also always show the attitude of openness to the government, especially about the funds that we manage. And at the same time, the government will also kind of spontaneously open up on their budget. At this level, we even have discussions about co-sharing and broader support. For example, the limitations of the Rutgers program is that we only in 12 villages in one particular area. So the local government will work outside of those 12 villages areas with government funds. So you see that there is a co-sharing and collaboration between NGOs and also government. However, they use our knowledge resources, modules, teacher training, school training, and policy making at school and district level. Last thing is, at the end, you have to leave a great legacy for the government and community, as they are more sustainable than governments and donor funding itself.
Thank you very much, Amala. It is very inspiring to hear you speaking about the work you do. I have another question for you, which is connected to the challenges, and is, how did you present or frame CSE as part of your advocacy approach?
Well, since Indonesia, in Indonesia we face challenge from conservative thinking group quite hard. So we don't always have to use the terminology that sounds good at global level, but sensitive at local level. Being wise in using the global term is essential, and contextualizing it properly to local context culture. This also applies to jargon that is so difficult to be understood by the general community, like what is intersectionality term for them, or gender bias, or invisible power, and so on and so forth. So I think Genius is making complicated things to be simple, not the other way around. So the other thing is we make sure you blend in with the government system. It means, this means that adapting the delivery model to the government structure and vocabulary if you want to ensure program sustainability. You should use the government terminology and program language. I'll give you example in Bali and Papua. The issue of teenage pregnancy is very dominant in worrying parents and also teachers. But in West Java province, child marriage is the main obstacle to the low enrollment rate for youth education. So practically in CSE, sexuality education itself a sensitive term in Indonesia. So we use the character education program that is one of the government priorities in Indonesia as an entry point to show how comprehensive sexuality education will help the government achieve their goals. So as I said, character education, child friendly city, or school friendly are what we use to deliver CSE without mentioning CSE in our daily activities. So that's kind of one of the we did in terms of framing the comprehensive sex education.
Thank you so much, Amal. I hope everyone enjoyed your presentation and your answers as much as I did.
Thank you.
Now I'm handing it over to my colleague, Machado from Rutgers in the Netherlands.
Hello. Now we get to the fourth phase, which is to establish the building blocks. This phase, the main outcome is that crucial stakeholders agree on the practical planning to ensure efficient expansion of quality CSC delivery. As we have done in the previous phases, we'd like to start with asking a question. Yes? Can we move to the next slide, please? Yes. So do you know the cost of your CSC intervention per student or young person? Before answer, please consider not only the cost for your own organization, but also government actors and other key stakeholders and partners. And not only the upfront one-time costs, such as adaptation and translation of materials, but also ongoing costs, such as teacher trainings, teacher time. There are three possible options. If we could launch the poll now, please. Yes, I have done this calculation. No, I haven't done that yet, but I know how I can calculate it. I know what are the drivers of this cost. And no, I never thought about it. We'll give you a couple of seconds to reply. I guess is the poll. I guess we closed the poll already. Yes. Okay. Very interesting. Most of the participants never thought about it. So soon you'll hear about a case that might help you thinking about that. So here, let's share a bit of the building blocks. As Audrey has mentioned before, phase 3 is the planning phase. So the first thing here is to identify roles and responsibilities. And as of Audrey and Larry also said, it's important to assign an institutional home and a body that has the authority, the skills, the resources, and the capacity to take the lead on this process. It is very important to agree on roles and responsibilities, not only of governmental actors, but also the non-governmental stakeholders involved. 3.2 relates to setting up coordination mechanisms where all of the pieces of this puzzle comes together. It should involve bringing together different domains, for example, between ministries, but also between different administrative levels and other levels and organizations involved in implementing sexuality education. It's important to assess existing coordinating mechanisms to avoid wasting time and resources by creating and setting up new coordination mechanisms in the country. The next one is developing a scale-up plan, which is where you agree on the strategies looking ahead, how sexuality education is going to be provided, where it will be implemented, what materials will be used. It involves technical aspects, but also how you plan to deal with political or policy legal obstacles as you are implementing this trajectory. The next one is determining the scale-up costs. So how you are reviewing the costs of your intervention and the funding implications. Here is really important to pay attention on the key trade-off between coverage and quality and agree amongst your partners the minimum standards on content and quality. The next one is linking to services and out-of-school sexuality education. Following, we see the developing the curriculum related materials, as with Amala said, the importance to contextualize to the country needs and the context itself. The participatory approach, it's really important at this moment, where you involve young people, parents, caregivers, religious leaders. A participatory approach at this moment has been shown to be a key ally in counter opponents' arguments of sexuality education being an external agenda, a foreign agenda being imposed to countries, which is something that we see quite often around the world. The next phase, the next step within this planning phase is piloting the intervention. And pilot here is really piloting with a scaling mindset, considering the scalability of the intervention elements, such as training teachers and test referral mechanism, but also include the communications approach to really create the buy-in of the scalability of this intervention looking ahead. And finally is the measurement and evaluation. And again, here is really important to plan on how you're measuring the components of your intervention, whether you have indicators to track quality or the cost drivers are remained as with your planning as you're planning before, right? If you could move slides, please. So some of the key findings from our case studies for this specific part was that to agree on institutional home within the education ministry, I think you have heard that 2 or 3 times already, and that's very, very important. The next one is to develop a clear MOU and a scale-up plan with roles and responsibilities between governmental and non-governmental actors as well. The last one is to test the acceptability and scalability through piloting with the scaling up mindset, the scalability of its elements. And now I would like to invite our colleague Miranda. She's a senior researcher at Rutgers International Development, and she was involved in developing a costing tool in Indonesia. Welcome, Miranda.
Thank you for having me. Hi, Mary.
I would like to ask you 2 questions. The first one is, what is a costing tool?
Costing evaluation or an economic evaluation is an economic evaluation of a CSE program. Looks at the annual financial costs per student. So how much does it cost to reach one student with a CSE? And I think it was mentioned before, it's a bit different from a project budget because you look at the costs for the institution that you wish to take over the implementation or to implement the intervention and to scale it up. So in our case, in Indonesia, the implementing partners wanted to convince the city government, education offices at the 3 cities where we worked, where we are working, to take that over. So we calculated the costs for these city education officers to implement the program. And that includes looking at, for instance, the costs for salaries of teachers in relation to the time that they invest to teach Setara, the CSE curriculum in Indonesia. And that's important because the time teachers take to teach Setara, they cannot teach something else, like environmental awareness or anything that your CSE intervention is in competition with. And for decision makers, that's important to weigh off. So that's why the costing evaluation also looked at these costs.
And why should we consider doing a costing evaluation or this analysis?
Yeah, basically for 3 main reasons. To convince the government to scale up, but also to understand who can fund what, so that you can focus your budget advocacy very specifically on that. And the third reason is to make your CSE intervention more cost efficient. And I can elaborate a little bit. I can give some examples from the experience with Indonesia. So the implementing partners wanted to make an investment case with their city governments. So we calculated what the costs were in a new school per student. And these were around $10 to $15 per student, because when you start in a new school, you actually have to do a lot of activities. You have to do the parent sensitization, the teacher trainings, but also printing of the modules. But in schools that were already implementing and had some routine, these costs dropped to 50 cents per student. So basically you can consider that there's an investment phase and there's a maintenance phase. And we use that information to convince the city governments to take over the maintenance activities and costs for the schools that were already implementing, and to co-fund elements of the scale-up plan that the implementing partner had with the offices, the city government offices. And that brings me to the second point, that it can really help you understand who can fund what, because you may find that different institutions or funders even are interested in funding different elements. So the Ministry of Education might be more interested in funding maybe the teacher trainings, while maybe the health office or the Ministry of Health may be prone to fund the materials for it, maybe because they developed the curriculum. So you can consider these costs, and we use that to negotiate with the governments about the roles, divisions of tasks and responsibilities and co-funding. And then the third point is about understanding your main cost drivers. So I was surprised to find that in Indonesia, 73 to 88% of the costs are attributed to the printing and the distribution of the manuals, so the teacher and student books. So for every $10 that you need to reach a student, $8 are used to printing the book. That's a major barrier for scale up, if you consider that. So yeah, that makes us think about how can we reduce those costs? How can we maybe even prevent these costs? And Rutgers Indonesia has been developing an online module for the Setara CSE curriculum under COVID pandemic. And we really see that as a possible solution to a number of implementation challenges, but also it can really reduce the costs per student and make it more scalable. So in some, cost evaluations sound boring, but are super important. You can make a stronger case with your institutions for co-funding, co-ownership and scale up. And it can be used to make your intervention more cost efficient.
Thank you so much, Miranda. Very important to know your cost drivers in this effort to scale and reach more young people. Thank you so much. Now we'll go to our final phase. Head to Maeva, our colleague.
Thank you very much. So this final fourth phase is about implementation and scale up. So this is where the real outcome is about that the actual CSE is expanding and that it is done so in a sustainable way to actually reach those numbers that we want. So we're going to start with a poll. So what is the most important factor for success during the expansion phase? Is it printing and dissemination materials to schools? Is it including CSE and pre-service teacher training or effective scale-up coordination mechanisms? So please launch the poll and we'll see what the results will be after you have given your ideas. Okay. So if we look at the results, we can see that the majority chose the third option, effective scale-up coordination mechanisms. And indeed, I think some of you might have wanted to choose like all of the above, and that falls actually under this effective scale-up coordination mechanisms, because they are, if that is in place, then printing and disseminating materials will be planned, and including CSE and pre-service will also be done well if there is a good coordination mechanism. So, next slide, please. So, what are the steps of this fourth phase? It's securing local support and permission. This means engaging the decentralized authorities and ministry departments, but also the school boards and other important local key stakeholders to ensure ownership and leadership at that local level. Furthermore, the scaling up in service and pre-service teacher training and support is very important, especially in service, because that's where the sustainability is being reached. That's where you really go into the system and make sure that the teachers, before they even get to their diplomas, already learn how to provide the sexuality education within their work. Then, of course, there is this efficient management of scale-up. As we said, it's the most important part. So the ordering here is not from most important to least important. They're all very important. And this includes the clear strategy, where you include the coordination mechanisms with a role division and a budget allocation. So who does what, and know that from each other, to make sure that all the other steps are being done appropriately. Then the institutionalization within the government systems for the rollout. So that means that, for instance, the sexuality education indicators needs to be also included in the annual school census or in the educational management information system, so that it becomes really part of the normal, as was said already by Larry Cooley. And also, for instance, in the job descriptions and in all the structures that already exist, it needs to be integrated into that. And then last but definitely not least, as was said from the beginning and throughout the whole process, you need to work on the support and addressing possible opposition proactively, which means that you can never take it for granted. Governments might change, people might change positions, but also even people that remain in position might be influenced by different forces within your context. So keep looking for your champions, keep engaging what we call the silent supporters, and keep convincing the movable middle of people who have not taken yet a position, to make them support your program and understand the importance and the well-being of the young people, that you contribute to that. So that's the next slide that brings us to the lessons learned in this phase, is like ensure government ownership and leadership of the scale-up. Support effective mechanisms for coordination at every level, and secure the buy-in at subnational level, and support the teachers because they're the ones who are going to have to do it in the end. And integrate sexuality education into the pre-service teacher training to make sure that from the beginning, teachers have the capacity to actually deliver what you want them to deliver. And then integrate it into M&E, integrate it into the existing data collection procedures to make sure it's taken into account, and maintain commitment to prevent backlash. So those were the lessons learned that we saw from our studies. Now I want to go to Ibrahim Musa. He's a project coordinator at ABBF from Benin. And as you can also read in the study report, which includes the case of Benin, the Benin government is now at the phase of rolling out the scale-up of CZ. So it's getting towards that fourth phase. And therefore, we invited Ibrahim to share some of their experiences in this process. Since Benin is a Francophone country, partly, I will move to French now. So I will move myself to another language channel. And I will start speaking French. Donc voilà. Bonjour Ibrahim. Merci.
So hello Ibrahim, thank you for being here. So the first question that I have is how CSOs can influence the quality of delivery in the scaling up of CSE. Thank you, Maeva. I'm very happy to participate in this webinar, and I thank you very much for this invitation. Indeed, CSOs who have expertise and experience regarding teaching CSE cannot and should not stay away from the whole process, especially if we want a successful program. and a sustainable program. So in the Benin context, as you said, Maeva, CSE is part of the curriculum since 2018. Currently, we are in an experimental phase, which involves different schools. But to get there, CSOs have done a lot of advocacy work for years, including my IBPF organization. When the decision was made to integrate CSE in the curriculum, it was logically that CSOs have been involved in the process. We were able to influence the quality of the program at two levels at least, the development of the content, but also the training of trainers. So regarding the development of content, we have participated in all the workshops, in all the work sessions, which have led to validate the content. For the training of trainers, we were there as well, especially to insist on the themes and the approaches that we are experts in particular, the positive approach on sexuality, because the traditional approach means a lot of prohibitions for young people, and it makes them feel guilty, and this has not been efficient. So CSOs, based on their expertise, insist on this positive approach. In your work, you managed to create a relationship with institutions at the government level. How did you manage to do that? Thank you, Maeva. Regarding the Benin, we have a public organization which coordinates the whole process. It's called INIFCF. It's an institute, a national institute of engineering and training and strengthening of capacities for trainers. So it's an autonomous organization which is directed by the Ministry of Education. The advantage for Benin is that the actors of this organization have already understood the importance of involving the actors of civil societies to have the program succeed. Regarding IBPF, we have involved many actors in our activities. So these actors participate in the training sessions that are organized by IBPF with young people. It is quite frequent that they come as well on the field to supervise, so they have seen the work that we're doing on the field. And this is the reason why regularly they ask us to come and give our expertise at the different initiatives that they work on. Thank you very much. Thank you, Maeva. So we are now reaching the end, and I will give the floor to Ardan to close the meeting.
Thank you, Maeva. We're nearing the end, that's true, but before going away, I would like to get back to our opening where I raised if you would be able to pick a pen and paper and see if you could note throughout the webinar any ideas for how we could apply this work together, how we can apply these activities, these lessons, practically collaborate to this end. So I've put back on the screen the overarching framework so that we can take a step back together and look at how does this back fit all into place. And I think when looking at this, we all probably recognize that we're probably already doing a lot of these activities. There might be some that you're not yet doing, but probably a lot already. What I think is the strength of this framework is that it brings it all together and that it creates an overview of all the work in advocacy, in research, in implementation, program design, and brings it together to one direction and objective. And it embraces the beginning with the end in mind concept. That is the main message from the WHO ExpandMed community of practice for scaling up. So with all that said, we hope to also get your ideas and advice for how we can practically work on this. And this can be generic, like an advice for a direction or advice or reflections on what you've heard today, but also very practical ideas for how we can collaborate or produce something together. So what I will do, we're gonna open the chat and we're gonna give you 2 minutes to just note down what you've thought up so far, or give you some time to write that down. And then please don't submit it yet, don't press enter yet. We're gonna all send it together in 2 minutes. So that we can see how much stress we can put on the Zoom chat service. But so I'll stop there. I'll put up some nice tune for you to think along with, and I'll give you 2 minutes to give us your advice. So thank you. I'm very curious what ideas you all have. Before sending your message, can I please make sure that when on the box you see 2, that you have selected everyone in the meeting so that we can all see all the messages fly by. So on the count of 3, I will all ask you to share your ideas. So 3, 2, 1, please send. Please press send. There we see the messages coming in. Thank you. Thank you to see all your advice. So it's really great to see all your advice and ideas coming by. We're going to follow up on them after the webinar. As said at the start, our objective of this webinar is not to disseminate our findings, but really we see it not as an end of a research trajectory, but as a start of potential collaboration and of much work to come. So with that said, I'm moving to really the end of it. I would like to just touch on a few lessons that we've learned on the way. We've seen that also based on the UNESCO report, the latest status of CSE, that there's still a large gap. There's many policies that are addressing this, but implementation on the ground is still lagging behind. We've become really good at delivering and designing quality programs, but there's a big challenge ahead of learning from these lessons and making sure that we move from projects to reaching all youth through the schooling system. And we believe that with the right scaling strategies, we and our partners, that we can together reach the biggest generation of youth. And we hope this framework will be able to support that. There's lessons that we've learned is that less than 5% really of the interventions that are out there really reach scale, so that your reputation as an ally with relevant expertise will be leading on your role of being able to scale things up. It's important to link it to a local concern, develop a clear MOU to test your cost effectiveness, and it would be really helpful to see how we can do that together, to support all the coordination mechanisms and to maintain the commitment and prevent backlash throughout the entire process. Rutgers has just recently launched a new website. I would very much welcome you to take a look. This report is on there, so I welcome you to take a look at that. We also have, of course, the SETA economic analysis that have been referred to, but also tools, for example, on meaningful inclusive youth participation, because we believe youth should be at the center of this programming. We discussed a lot today about the bigger processes of scaling up the interventions that work, but we very much embrace youth to be centered in our programs. Throughout the next year, Rutgers is also working on updating the Deliver and Enable toolkits to include all these lessons and to provide more practical guidance to this end. And also the IPPF, it's all one curriculum to our IPPF Centers of Excellence program. So I'd like to finish with that this is a first step for us. So it's not the end of the research, but we're really open to work with you on this. Our email address here is centerofexcellence@rutgers.nl. So please send us a note and reach out to us. But you can also reach out to PPAG in Ghana, Pro Familia in Colombia, or ATBF in Togo. These are our partners in the CSE Centers of Excellence program, and would also welcome your requests and engagements. So with that, I would just like to thank you all the speakers that have contributed today, that have spoken from their experience and shared practical experiences with us. And I very much look forward to working with you on the scale up of sexuality education. Thank you very much for being part with us today.